This is the sermon for January 23rd, 2022. And the first scripture reading is from Isaiah 62, 1 through 4. You will have a new name. You'll be a stunning crown in the palm of the divine hand, a jeweled cup held high. No more will anyone call you rejected, and the body of the people will not be called ruined. You'll be called my delight, because God delights in you. And then from Isaiah 36, 5 through 10. Your steadfast love, God, goes on forever. Your judgments are like the great deep. You save humans and animals alike. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Oh, continue your steadfast love. And then from John 2, 1 through 10, and I'm going to be reading a slightly abbreviated version from that. John chapter 2. 3 days later, there was a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples were guests also. When they started running low on wine at the wedding banquet, Jesus' mother told him, "They're just about out of wine." She told the servants, "Whatever he tells you, do it." 6 large stoneware water pots were there. Jesus ordered the servants, "Fill the pots with water." And they filled them to the brim. "Now fill your pitchers and take them to the host," Jesus said. And they did. When the host tasted the water that had become wine, he didn't know what had happened, but the servants, of course, knew. He called out to the bridegroom, "Everybody I know begins with their finest wines, and after the guests have had their fill, brings in the cheap stuff. But you've saved the best till now." Well, I want to begin talking about these scriptures and additional scriptures each week as I talk about the 12 steps of recovery. Now, the recovery movement is for anyone with an addiction. And it includes alcohol, food, sugar, drugs. It could be anything. But Drina gave me the 2 books by Richard Rohr, Breathing Underwater. I have the book and I have the companion journal. And I'm writing in the companion journal because it's giving me a lot to reflect on and a lot to think about. And many of you might say, "Well, I'm not an alcoholic and I'm not addicted to sugar or food. I don't have a problem, so this doesn't relate to me, so I'm going to check out now." And I don't have a problem with alcohol. I never have. I feel very neutral about alcohol. But I want to ask you, have you ever done something selfish? Have you ever done something that it ended up being your way or the highway? In fact, those are the 4 words: your way or highway, to talk about ego. Are you addicted to your own ego rather than God's love? Have you ever been less than fully loving with the divine love? Well, I think we can all answer yes to that question. In fact, I type yes in all capital letters. I've been selfish at times. It's been my way or the highway. I've been less than fully loving with divine love. I've been self-centered. Another way to name all of that is sin. Why did Jesus come to show us love? And what did Jesus teach us about love? And how did Jesus learn about love from the Bible? Well, this is the thing, is that when it comes to the Bible and when it comes to Jesus and when it comes to divine love, it is not mathematical. It is not cut and dried. It is not, black and white. Instead, Love is about being with people who are having a hard time and walking with them. It's suffering with. Companion means sharing bread with or suffering with. Passion, compassion, suffering with. And so, how did Jesus learn about love from the Bible? This is why Christians always start with the Hebrew Scriptures, Isaiah and the Psalms today. And then we get to the Gospel of John. Let's look at both. Start with Isaiah. Isaiah reads like the New Testament very often, and Jesus quotes from Isaiah very frequently. Even John the Baptizer is quoted as speaking from Isaiah 40. In the wilderness, prepare the way, let the mountains and valleys be leveled, build a superhighway, flat and wide, so that all people can travel, even those who are vulnerable, and that they can return home to God. So not only Jesus speaks from Isaiah, but so does John the Baptizer. And Isaiah 62 talks about God delighting in us. In clear language, you will no longer be called rejected, a wreck, ruined. Instead, your new name will be called Delight, because God delights in you. That gives us an indication of where we have been: wrecked, lost, ruined, rejected. And who hasn't experienced that? Really? Who hasn't had that happen? When we've had that happen, lost, ruined, rejected, we want to know that we are cherished, that God delights in us. The delight wouldn't mean much if we didn't know about being ruined or shipwrecked or lost or rejected. So now look at Psalm 35. Your steadfast love, God, goes on forever. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. I don't know about you, but I would love to be a baby eaglet and be protected in the shadow of my mama eagle's wings. Think of her fierce talons and beaks, and think about being protected in the shadow of the mama eagle's wings. When I went to the Owl Prowl at Severson Dells, I loved touching the warm softness of the owl's wing. They had an owl that had died of natural causes, and they had the wing that we could touch. And those little tiny downy feathers meant that the owl can fly almost silently. It's amazing. And I would feel very comfortable being protected by the mama owl as well. And so we have that in Psalm 36. I think I said Psalm 35 before, but it's Psalm 36. The psalm goes on to say, they feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. Well, like I said, I'm not a big fan of alcohol. Occasionally a little bit of wine is nice, but I love clear, cold water on a hot day when exercising. I think everybody does. I love flavored waters. I love my morning coffee with a little bit of flavoring and some cream in it. What do you love to drink? What are the, when it says you give them drink, speaking of God, you give them drink from the river of your delights. What is it that gives you such delight that God provides you? What satisfies you deeply is the question. When I went kayaking in the winter on the Sugar River, the water from the river was so clear that I could see the bottom of the river as if there was no water there at all. And that's amazing. It reminds me of this passage. They feast on the abundance of your house, God, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. And the psalm goes on to say, for with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Oh, continue your steadfast love. Well, Monday night when I walked at the Nigran wetlands under the full moon, I thought there was a quiet vehicle behind me, one of those four-wheelers. I think they call them Kubota there at Nigran. and I thought it had its lights on, and I turned around to see what they wanted. Maybe they wondered why I was walking alone on the path all the way around the loop of the wetlands. Turned out there was no vehicle there. It was that the moon had gone behind a tree and that had come out full force. And I thought it was headlights behind me. That's how bright the moon was last Monday night. My shadow was so clear that I was startled, and it happened not once, but 2 or 3 times that I was surprised. And the psalm says, "In your light we see light." And it goes right on, "Continue your steadfast love." We want steadfast love because we are iffy at times. We get involved in that my way or the highway. We get involved in sin. It's just human nature. And then we come to the story of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding feast. The servants knew what the wine steward did not know. And you'll see throughout scriptures, the servants know far more than those in the ruling class. Far more than in the ruling class. The wine had been drawn from water jars that had been filled. These were jars not used for drinking water. They were used for cleansing rituals and water from that. The wine steward was amazed that Jesus had saved the best wine for last. Well, we often fail. We fall flat on our faces. We act selfishly. And Jesus saves the best for last. We're often given help when we need it most. And it is the very best quality of help. The story isn't so much about wine as it is the help that God gives us in Jesus. We run out of love. We run out of help. We run out of resources. We often run out of compassion. We run out of doing things with the love of God. Instead, we become like a 2-year-old or 3-year-old. "I do it myself," we yell. We don't want help from God. We don't want help from others. We want to be independent and autonomous. And then I hope we mature and we learn the way of love, steadfast love, compassion, listening to God, following the way of Jesus, praying the prayer of Jesus. Remember, our Father, that's the prayer of Jesus. No longer putting self at the center of things. We begin to place others at the center and offer compassion. We learn and we go against our ego. Remember, it's not our way or the highway. I read that we think those other people have mistaken beliefs. We have the facts. And this is part of the tribal nature of our culture. We know the real score. They have mistaken beliefs. And we think we're the exception. Well, it's something worth looking at. They're wrong-headed. All I have to do is straighten them out, and they'll come to see things my way. It's, that's ego. And so we all need to look at that. We are not exceptions. This is where our suffering shows the way. When we don't get our way, Jesus' suffering showed him the way. And we learn that suffering breaks our hearts, and we learn how to help one another through the lens of suffering. This is why Jesus' suffering is at the center of faith. It isn't some theory of atonement that God needed to be paid off and that Jesus' death paid off a debt. It isn't that at all. It's that the nature of growing spiritually, of being healed of ego, involves suffering, redemptive suffering, in the sense that we learn from our suffering. We learn compassion for others from our suffering. The reason that we need crucifixion at the center of faith is because we have to learn over and over and over again that our ego dies a hard death. We always want to drag ego back into the center. And as long as we forget and put ourselves at the center of things, we're reminded by Jesus that suffering is the way. It's suffering that softens us up when we realize that we belong together. We're all in the same boat. Jesus on the cross is sharing in suffering so that we can also alleviate some of the suffering for others. So when Beth and Joel Spielman carry the suffering of the people of Haiti, and we learn, we hear, and they remind us of both suffering and the way we can help, that's our call as Christians. If we separate ourselves from others and we say, nope, it's my way, I've got the answers, we separate ourselves from both God, from love, and from suffering, and that's ego. Again, we forgot. So we go back to Isaiah and the Jewish people. Now, the Jewish people were a little country, and they were beaten up by the big countries around them. And they were rejected, ruined, and lost. And what would you call Jesus on the cross? Rejected, ruined, and lost. Suffering and death. There's no ego in the middle of crucifixion. There's no ego in the middle of the 3 days in the tomb. Jesus breathed his last. There was grief. They were lost. It was a worst case scenario, and that's true. We don't get to skip the crucifixion and hop directly from go to collect our $200 on the Monopoly board the next time and hop, skip, and jump to win. It's, what if the teachers on TV, the Christian pastors with big churches, if they taught the death of ego, the crucifixion, would they have huge crowds following them? I don't think so. And I think that's why at one point Jesus said, will you leave me too? It's not a popular message to say that you must die to ego. It's not a popular teaching. And so we find our way following Jesus through crucifixion into death and through suffering into helping one another. And God brings about the resurrection. Amen.